I want to thank you all for coming. This is the last of our events related to Law Day that are co-sponsored by the Dartmouth Lawyers Association, the Rockefeller Center, and we've also had a great deal of help from the Office of Alumni Relations. So I want to thank all of those groups for helping with plan these events these last 2 days. My name is Xander Mize Bay. I'm a member of the class of 2001, and I am a vice president of the Dartmouth Lawyers Association. Go Lawyers. So today we're going to talk about, our panelists are going to talk about how they have incorporated public service into their legal careers. And to do that, they're going to talk about why they went to law school, what they did after law school, how their path may have been what they expected and what they did not expect, and also where they see their career path going from here. And then we're going to open it up to questions, and all questions are fair game, but I will say on behalf of the panelists that they can reserve the right not to answer. And with respect to Mr. Verrilli, who is here in his personal capacity, he is not able to speak about any cases that are pending before the courts. So with that disclaimer, I think I'm going to give a very, very brief introduction of each of the panelists and otherwise leave it to themselves. Mr. Donald Verrilli is here to my left. He also has another title of Solicitor General, but I will let him explain as to how one became another. Next, we have Leah Panowski, who's a member of the class of 2001. Also, which is, as I am a member as well. And she is an associate at Nixon Peabody in Albany, New York. She's also very active in BATA and in other Dartmouth alumni activities. To her left, we have Todd Cranford, a member of the class of 1985, fellow class member to Professor John Gravy, who was with us on the previous panel. Todd is currently an of counsel at Patton Boggs in Washington, D.C., but he has held a host of other titles in his past in both the federal government, also in a city government. He's also worked in a political campaign. I will leave him to give you some of those details. And to his left, we have Craig Nolan, who's a member of the class of 1990. He is currently an assistant U.S. attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Vermont. And he has also worked as a state's attorney in Vermont and in private practice in both Vermont and North Carolina. And he is going to tell us a little bit about that path as well. So I'm going to do a reverse of the previous panel. And we're going to start all the way on the left with Craig, if Craig does not mind. So also, if you could tell us what your major was when at Dartmouth, because lawyers certainly come from a host of majors, and I think everyone would be interested. But
fair enough. It's actually the first thing on my notes. It's kind of sad. You hit your mid-40s, and all of a sudden you have to make notes about what you've done over the past 15, 20, 25 years. So you can come talk to people about
20
it.
minutes.
Yeah. So, and let me just, I don't think this disclaimer is needed, but I am going to disclaim anyway. This is Craig on Craig and legal jobs. It is not Eric Holder on Craig and legal jobs, because I am with the Department of Justice. I was a psych major here at Dartmouth, and I thought, frankly, that I would go on in psychology. I had a lot of practice at home listening to my mom and my dad and my two brothers, and I enjoyed that, but ultimately decided that I would not pursue it. Senior year, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and eventually I found really a way right back to psychology by going to law school and ending up as a state prosecutor and then a federal prosecutor. Senior year, and this is mostly directed at the students. Senior year, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And a couple of my friends got into law school. I thought that sounded interesting. So I decided to spend a couple of years checking that out. Not by going to law school initially, but actually I worked as a paralegal. There were lots of folks who would take their off terms and go to New York City, and back then make $10 an hour, which seemed like good money, working for Paul Weiss or some of the other large firms. They were called project assistants, and they had a great time. I think they worked till late every night, and then went out late every night, and then showed back up at work at 9 or 10 or 11 whenever things started back up again. So I did that. I did that for a year in New York, and I did that for a year in Washington, D.C. with a satellite office of a Midwestern firm that has since dissolved. Working in New York City, I realized that law seemed like a good thing for me, but I realized that big law was probably not the way to go. So I did go to law school, spent 3 years, wonderful years at William & Mary, enjoyed it tremendously. And then I clerked for a year with a federal district court judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina, Terry Boyle, who sits in Elizabeth City, which is just south of Virginia Beach. Great experience. From there, I spent a year in Raleigh doing employment law on behalf of employers at a 60-lawyer firm, which back then in North Carolina was big. That was right about the time that New York, Atlanta, LA firms were buying up North Carolina firms as the banking industry really ramped up in North Carolina. And finally, my wife and I, my wife went to Dartmouth. She was 90 as well. We had a child and decided we wanted to raise that child in northern New England. And I found my way back up to a firm in Burlington, Vermont. Did different types of civil litigation there. Great experience, but really, really wanted to try cases. Really, really wanted to stop fighting about money and start prosecuting. So my wife and I had a running joke. I would never take a job unless it paid less, which is pretty much what happened for most of my career. You know, I went to clerk. I don't know, they paid us like 30 grand a year back then. And then I went to North Carolina firm, and thereafter, I came to Vermont. They paid me less, but interestingly enough, the houses cost more. I never really understood that. And then I went to clerk for a judge, and I made a little less. And I went back to the firm. I clerked for a judge on the Second Circuit. It was a great experience. Went back to that same civil litigation firm. And then I really wanted to prosecute. And I took a job in Lamoille County. Many of you will not know where Lamoille is, but I bet you if I say Stowe, Vermont, you will recognize that. Stowe is in Lamoille County. The most of Lamoille County is rural and much poorer than Stowe. It's a beautiful, beautiful place with lots of farms and only about 25,000 people. And I got hired on as a part-time contract VAWA prosecutor. So they paid me $25 an hour to prosecute the worst cases, the sex offenses and the domestic assaults. And I couldn't have enjoyed it more. It was a wonderful experience. I got to be in the courtroom every day. I got to serve the public. I got to have an impact on a community of 25,000 people. I mean, you go to the market, the Price Chopper in Morrisville, and you run in to your victims, you run into your defendants, you run into your witnesses, and you run into your police officers. You know, all in one 45-minute trip. But 45 minutes often turns into an hour and a half because they all have questions. Thankfully, you can't talk to the defendant. He's got an attorney, and you're not it. So I did that for 3 years. And frankly, and I'll ask the SG to close his ears, it was the best job I ever had. There's nothing better than being a prosecutor in a small county if you want to have an impact on your community and see that impact and actually learn how to do something, which is great. In fact, I think all federal prosecutors ought to go spend a year in Lamoille County, learn how to try a case, and then become a federal prosecutor. I spent 3 years there and moved over to the neighboring county, Washington County, because the longtime prosecutor there, he died, unfortunately, Terry Trono. He was an institution. And I was lucky enough to get the appointment to succeed him, and I did that for 2 years. I learned a lot. I learned that politics, though I love to watch, though I love to participate in politics, in terms of assisting others, that being in a public office where you have to run for the job if you want to keep it is not a lot of fun. You take a lot of phone calls and you spend a lot less time in court, a lot less time helping victims, and a lot less time being a prosecutor. Anyway, I did that for 2 years. I ran into some electoral difficulties, and then I moved on to the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is the second best job I've had since becoming an attorney, and it is just a tremendous, tremendous job. They're great resources, we do great work, and in Vermont, it's, Vermont's has the population of a medium-sized city spread across Vermont. So in a lot of ways, we're a very small office, a very small territory. Maybe it's like being a prosecutor in a medium-sized county in some places. But it's a great thing to do. And, so that's really my background. I don't know if there's another question I'm supposed to answer, but I think I'll pass to Todd here.
Well, I will pass to Todd, but we'll come back to you and ask what you're going to do in the future.
And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be home. I was very interested in the topic of public service because, particularly in this day and age where capitalism seems to be paramount, there are fewer and fewer people interested in public service, which I have found very rewarding. And I begin my little discussion with, I think public service was in my blood. I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and my father is a retired parole officer. So I had some exposure to the criminal justice system at an early age, and my father took, I think, great pains to try to really interact with his parolees. And and I just had this conversation with him a few weeks ago. There's one instance that I will never forget that he actually brought a parolee on vacation with us. Yeah. And yeah, and that was my reaction. And I had no idea what this young man had done, but I just knew if he was on parole, he broke the law. But my father saw in him someone who had an opportunity to do better. And he wanted to expose him to what my father believed was a good family life. That young man became a friend of the family. Unfortunately, he did get into trouble one or two more times, but it was nothing very serious. But to this day, he credits my father with having helped him. And that was important for me to see, and my sister to see, because it gave us an opportunity to realize that we could, as Craig was just saying, give back to the community in a very tangible way. Now, this was only one young man, and I'm sure he had an impact on others, but this was the one that I got to know. So fast forward, I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was 12 years old. The reasons have changed over the years, but I have always wanted to be a lawyer. You know, at first I wanted to be a titan of Wall Street. Then I wanted to be Thurgood Marshall, and I wanted to, be an instrument of social justice. And then I wanted to be the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York and put the bad guys away. And here I now find myself a public policy attorney in Washington, D.C. But I have been very blessed to have the opportunities to work, to work in all three branches of government, at the federal level and on the local level. And I've been out of law school now for almost 24 years, and 18 of those have been in public service. And I think it is one of the highest callings that you can have, and there are many routes that you can take to get there. I too served as a judicial law clerk when I first got out of law school, and I have also worked in the executive branch, working for the Securities and Exchange Commission as a regulator, and then on Capitol Hill, working for the Financial Services Committee. So we've been in the thick of things with Dodd-Frank over the past few years, and now as a lobbyist, not doing public service now, and some would argue a disservice, but it's been for me a very fascinating and rewarding ride over the last 20 plus years. And even though I'm in the private sector now, I still cherish all the experience that I've had working for the government, because you do have an opportunity, one, to get significant experience, two, to do something that's rewarding, and depending upon what city you're in and what your lifestyle is like, actually make a good salary. You know, you clearly make less than you can in the private sector, but if money's the most important thing to you, you're probably not going to go to law school to begin with. And I'll stop there.
Leah?
I'm Leah Panowski. I think we have a lot of the same aspirations. All the dream jobs you listed were dream jobs I've had. I went to law school because I wanted to impact change. And as I had lunch with Nels Armstrong earlier today, and I said, I don't know how this happened, but I work for the man. I'm married to the man. I drive the man's car. And so in a lot of ways, what are you doing here on the public? Talking about public service. But what's been nice for me is I went to Dartmouth, I came straight through and went to Columbia. I did not take any time off because my father told me taking time off is for white people. So I said, oh, okay, and went straight through. I think one of my big advices to you is rethink that. I wish I had taken a little bit of time and done other things. But it was nice because it meant I started practicing law pretty young, and I'm a senior associate now. I was at Simpson Thacher and Bartlett for 3 years in New York City, which was in one of the top litigation departments in the country. A lot of hours, a lot of work. I'm very proud of that job. I enjoyed the job.
Didn't Beatty head up litigation?
Yep, a lot of Dartmouth alums. That's probably why I got the job, because I went to Dartmouth. I'm proud of the job, and I'm glad I did it. 3 years out of that, I came to the realization that I've kind of come through all along, that as much as I was interested in being the next Thurgood Marshall, I love financial services laws, I love the Securities Act, I love the Exchange Act, I loved arbitrating, and you're like, oh God, this can't be what I'm good at. I wanted to work for the NAACP, but I really realized I liked working for a law firm, and I wanted to do it in a sustainable way that I could do it and not burn myself out. So I moved upstate to Albany, took a job at Nixon Peabody. It's a fairly 9 to 6 kind of job. I love it. I argue, I take depositions, I do all the things that my friends that are still at the law firms in New York they started with haven't done yet. And it gave me the time to kind of get back into public service. I'm currently the chairman of the board of directors of a federally funded community health organization. So we provide affordable care no matter what happens to the people in Albany. I also do a lot of pro bono because, again, I chose a different work environment where my definitely most moving legal experience in my career has been getting asylum for a Tibetan woman who was born in India, so therefore did not have kind of the getting asylum for Tibetans can be an open and shut to some, I would say. But this was a very tricky case because she was not actually born in Tibet, not actually seeking asylum from Tibet. I think as far as setback go, I really wanted to be a clerk. I applied twice for a federal clerkship, didn't get one either time. So I think, a lot of public interest jobs can be hard to get. So though you may have some setbacks in trying to steer your career toward public service, it is doable. And it is doable in the private sector. It's a question of maybe not being in the biggest city or working for the highest paying firm, but finding a way to make that balance so that you're still involved in your community. I guess I'll close really quickly with a kind of neat thing that happened to me last week. I was at the grocery store, and two young African-American women were checking me out, and I said, oh, you look like a girl I went to law school with. And the young woman said, oh, you're a lawyer? And I said, yeah. And we talked for a minute, and they were teenagers going to the public high school in Albany, asked me about what it was like. And, as I walked away, I said, well, I'll see you in court one day, ladies. And they were like, yeah, and it was a really great feeling. And it's one of those things that if I were still working, 80 hours a week, I wouldn't do my own shopping, and I wouldn't be able to have those kind of interactions. So, I think that to me is, the law really, no matter what you do, you really can continue to serve your community, provide advice, provide guidance. So I hope that no matter where your path takes you, you're able to do that.
Mr. Verrilli?
Here's how I'd like to approach this topic. My professional life was, for a huge chunk of it, a lot like yours, in that I went in, after clerking, I went into the world of private law firms and worked in the private sector for a very long time. So what I want to do is first talk about how, as a lawyer, in a private setting, you can still engage in very meaningful public service. And then I want to talk about, after that, a little bit about the last few years of my life and what I've learned about that and what may be relevant about that. So when before I started in a law firm, I had great privilege to be a law clerk to Justice Brennan on the Supreme Court. And during that time, it was 1984, 1985, it was a time when the states had started to become more vigorous in their use of the death penalty. In 1972, the Supreme Court had held it was unconstitutional. In 1976, reversed course and said it was constitutional. And states started using the death penalty as part of their criminal process in the late 1970s, and these cases took a long time to work their way through, but by 83, 84, 85, there were a lot of people in line to be executed, and they would file last-minute petitions at the Supreme Court asking for stays of execution, and the law clerks, one of the law clerks' jobs was to deal with these petitions. And one thing that struck me as I would read these petitions late at night was that very often they reflected the poor quality of lawyering, not so much in the petitions themselves that they were reading, but what they pointed up was that the people who were on death row seemed to have almost universally gotten very poor representation when they were in front of a jury and their life was at stake. So I said to myself, going through that experience, that I was going to try to do something about that in my career. And so when I went into private practice, I started taking death penalty cases on a pro bono basis. And I, over the years, have done many of them. And one point here to make is that, just as Leah suggested, you can be a lawyer in a private firm setting and make very significant contributions to the public interest while you're doing it. What I tried to do, at some point a few years into this, was decide that I was going to take, what lawyers and law firms do is have to record their billable hours, and so, which, everyone hates, and I hated it. But I decided that I would make sure at the end of each year that at least 10% of those hours were pro bono and public service hours. And that was pretty easy to do with these death row cases because they were very labor intensive. And there was a never-ending supply of them, it seemed. But over the years, I did a lot of these cases, and in addition to helping me, I think, fulfill a part of the obligation that every lawyer should feel to serve the public as part of being a member of this profession, it was enormously beneficial to me. Of all the people I represented on death row, 5 of those cases went to the Supreme Court. So I appeared in the Supreme Court 5 times representing people on death row as a result of having made this decision in 1984 that I was going to devote part of my time to this. And so I would never be in the position I'm in today, I don't think, had I not made that choice to do this kind of work and had that experience come out of it, of just being in this position. But even more importantly, the experience I had doing that work, although sometimes it doesn't work out so well, has been, I think, the most rewarding experience I've ever had. And there was one case in particular that I like to talk about where I started representing a fellow on death row in Maryland in 1992. He was on death row, so he'd already been convicted and sentenced to death. I was representing him in habeas corpus proceedings, first at the state level and then at the federal level. And that case was an 11-year odyssey. We had a trial in the state habeas court, which the judge tentatively ruled in our favor on, and then waited 2 years and issued an opinion ruling against us. And then we eventually got into federal court, and the federal trial judge ruled in our favor throughout the death sentence, throughout the conviction. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed and reinstated the conviction, reinstated the death sentence. And we filed a petition for review in the Supreme Court, and we didn't really think we had much hope, but the court took the case. And we were able to argue this case in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court invalidated the death sentence on the basis of an argument that actually kind of connected up to my experience back in 1984, which was that the lawyers representing him had done an ineffective job, and he therefore did not receive the rights he had under the Constitution to an effective representation of counsel under the Sixth Amendment. It was a case called Wiggins against Smith, and it ended up setting the standards that capital defense counsel have to meet in order to ensure that they provide the Sixth Amendment representation that their client deserves. That, that experience never would have happened to me had I not decided that I was going to make that kind of commitment to pro bono and public service work. And I did a lot. I mean, when I think back and what I was able to do in pro bono work, in addition to all this death penalty stuff, I negotiated a consent decree to desegregate the public housing of the city of Baltimore. I represented a Peace Corps volunteer who had been involuntarily mentally committed in the Ivory Coast. I represented Teach for America and all these organizations. I had just an amazing range of experiences. And I did asylum work like yours too. I represented a couple of people and got them asylum, a couple more and I didn't get asylum. But the enrichment that I experienced, yeah, it's really important to serve the public, but you're also serving yourself when you do that. So that's the first part of the story. Second part of the story, 2008, President Obama gets elected, and I was somebody very much a believer in the president, and also you may remember 2008, the country was really in a bad way, and I decided at that point that it was really time for me to embrace true public service and go into the government. I had settled in Washington largely because I sort of assumed that I would take my law degree and use it at the Department of Justice, and then the next thing I knew I was 50 years old, and I hadn't. And so I decided I was going to go into the Department of Justice. And what's been as wonderful as my life was during all those years in the private sector, and it was amazing. I got to work on amazing cases, and not only the pro bono cases, but the other stuff I did. The last 3 years have really been extraordinary because what it's allowed me to do is actually work with people who have made the choice to devote all of their time and energy to serving the public in positions in the Justice Department and in U.S. Attorney's offices. One of the things I've had to do both when I was in the department in 2009 in the Deputy Attorney General's office, and again in my current job, is I work a lot with people who are in U.S. Attorney's offices around the country, as well as people in the main justice office in D.C. These are amazing lawyers. They're every bit as brilliant and dedicated as the lawyers I work with in a law firm. And amazing thing, they work just as hard as all the lawyers I knew in my law firm for a fraction of the pay that the lawyers in the law firm worked. But what they get is, in addition to the satisfaction of serving the public, they get to go around the country and argue on behalf of the United States on incredibly important, interesting issues. And so, as wonderful and fulfilling as my private sector life was, I can see why the service to the public in jobs like a U.S. Attorney's Office or in the Justice Department is exponentially more fulfilling and more important. So that's, I guess, my bottom line on it.
Thank you. I think we're going to open it up to questions. Now, we'd ask that you use the microphones because this is being recorded, and this way your question can be heard on the recording. Well, I will ask the first question, which is something that students always seem to ask about is work-life balance. And some of you touched on it a bit in your statements, but if you could talk about that point again and how you balance the demands of your job with your demands outside of your office.
I'll start. So I have a problem answering that question because my daughter's in the audience.
My apologies for putting you on the spot.
And my daughter will tell you, if she's honest, that I probably didn't do the best job at that work-life balance thing. But one thing I did that was important to me was I set a rule for myself, which was that I was going to try to be home every night to have dinner with my daughter and my wife. I didn't always make it, but most of the time I did. And now often dinner was at about 9:30, but for me that was a very, that was about as close as I came to work-life balance, I guess. But it was very important for me to set that kind of a norm for myself. And so however you do it, I do think it's good to think about it in those terms, that, figure out what it is that actually really matters to you and make that, and turn it into a norm that you're going to try to actually live by, and not just kind of a vague aspiration. So. And I came to a lot of soccer games too, that's true. I did get to a lot of soccer games and track meets too, so.
I spoke a little bit about hours, and I think I made a large work-life balance decision when I left the city. But one thing I will add is I do think it helps that whatever you're doing outside of work, if you can find ways to align it with your job. So if you're going to serve on a board, making that pitch to your job that I might meet clients here, this is going to give me more visibility in the community. That makes it a lot easier to leave for a board meeting when the brief isn't finished. And then I would, on the other hand, I'm all very involved in my church, and that has nothing to do with my job. And I think it's important to pick something else that is not going to advance your, well, it might advance your career, but you're not doing it because it will advance your career. And that kind of lets you have some real personally fulfilling time that's not quite resume building as much.
Well, I'll briefly say I believe work-life balance is a function of a couple of things. It's one, obviously, your individual priorities. And then two, it's going to be the culture and environment where you work, whether it's in the private practice or whether it's in public service, working for a government agency or a not-for-profit. And you have to make the personal decision given your season in life. You know, are you single with no children? Are you married with children? Are you married with no children? And you have to, I think it's an evolving and moving process. And, you know, work-life balance could mean one thing for you at the age of 26 versus the age of 50. And you have to be committed to trying to do whatever it takes to be successful professionally, but also be true to your core. If your family and your outside activities are important to you, it's going to be difficult at times, but you will find a way to be able to do it. You know, we have all found time to be able to come up now and talk to you when I'm sure there are things that we all could be doing back home, but it was a priority and this was important to us, and that's why we wanted to come back. I mean, aside from the fact that we love Dartmouth, you know, it's always important to be able to find that time, and so I challenge you as you begin careers when you finish college or finish graduate school, you know, determine what is important to you at the time, and don't be so strident in it that you allow good opportunities to pass you by, whether, again, it's in the private sector or working for a not-for-profit or working in the government because you fear that the work-life balance isn't going to be there. There will clearly be seasons when it's elusive. I mean, you're just going to have to put in the time. Your family will miss you. Your organizations will miss you. I have always taken the position that, you know, for periods, I'm fine with that. I will work around it. But I refuse to take a position where it was going to be a prolonged stretch of time of years where I was not going to be able to do the other things that make me happy. And now that I am married and have children, make my wife happy.
Thanks. I guess a few observations. One, I have found that I work the same amount of hours wherever I am. So whether I'm in a law firm paying me the most amount of money, or I'm at the state's attorney's office as a contract part-time prosecutor making $25 an hour. And I think that that is true of a lot of people, that no matter what the setting is, there's something inside you that dictates, you know, how much time you're going to commit to that job. And, you know, maybe people can change. I don't know. And different environments have different expectations, but you find an equilibrium in any job. And I've just found that, you know, myself and the people I've observed in different workplaces, you know, if they work really, really hard at the law firm, when they go work for the county prosecutor, they work really, really hard over there. And their spouse says to them, gosh, you know, you took this huge pay cut. I thought you were going to be home more. And you sort of scratch your head and go, well, I think it's going to take some time. I'm learning how to become a prosecutor. But it doesn't change. Two, you know, with a family, I have a 15-year-old and I have a 6-year-old. And I have a wife. And so,
God bless you.
Thank you. What I found is that I had to determine what was important to them, because my time is limited. I stay busy at work, and I try to do as much as I can at home, but I think I've been successful in determining, well, okay, Shelby likes to ski with me during the ski season. And that's really important to her. And so that is something, I mean, I love to ski, but that is something that I make sure I make time to do because that's important to her. And Sophie, who's just turned 6, you know, she likes to wake up early on Saturday mornings and make pancakes with me and then go on some sort of adventure. That's what's important to her. I can't get home for her dinner because she actually eats early and then she goes to bed at 6:30 and sleeps 11 hours. I usually see her in the mornings. I can't get home by 6:30 generally. So I think that's a key. And making, you know, connecting with my family members and spending the time with them on things that are important to them, like making some of those soccer games for the older one and now for the younger one, that really, I think, is quality time, and it helps the balance, and it makes me happy. It makes me happy. So, you know, I think that those really, for me, are sort of the 2 observations in this area.
Right, well, thank you. I saw a hand over there. Okay.
This question actually kind of piggybacks a little bit on what you were saying, Craig, about, I mean, what you were really getting at is that some of that work-life balance is really just about who you are as a personality, and how you're wired and how you work. And one of the things at the last panel that I couldn't help but being slightly amused by actually was there was a range of people and there was a very broad range of personality that was sitting at that table. And I kind of want to rope you into this too, John, because he's I'm very sad that Paul Hodes is not here because that was a very strong personality, and but there are so many different kinds of people who wind up going to law school, and not all of you have practiced. Not everybody practices. Some people wind up teaching. Some people wind up sort of going into the nonprofit or public service sector, but not in a legal capacity exactly. And how much I get a lot of students who come to me wanting to plan for law school, and I find myself thinking a lot about who they are and how they're wired, and whether I think that's actually going to be a great fit or not, or whether I think, yeah, law school you would love it, but I don't think you're going to practice, you know, or I don't think you're going to. So if you could kind of talk about the way in which personality type has kind of factored into how you've thought about your career, and if John would jump in on that too.
Well, let's start with John, since the microphone is so at the ready.
Well, I'd be sure. I actually went right from here to law school and turned down a teaching job, a high school teaching job that I really wanted to take, and was really not true to myself, and spent most of law school regretting the fact that I had gone to law school, quite honestly. And I say this as somebody who just I love the law right now, and my law school friends are very amused by that. But I actually, graduating from law school, decided to do the high school teaching that I had not had turned down, and so I went into high school teaching, and it's just been pure serendipity that has led me back into this profession. I was because I couldn't afford to do anything else. I took a job teaching at a boarding school, so I was teaching and coaching and, you know, supervising a dorm and all that, and it was just too hard to maintain the relationship with the woman who's now my wife, who lived an hour away. And I really, there was a new federal judge appointed in New Hampshire, and I was looking for an exit from boarding school life, and I thought, oh, I'll clerk for a year or two and then just go back and teach civics. And it just, you know, serendipity, I guess, took over again. But I do think it's a really great point. I love the law. I love thinking about the law. I love the problems that arise in litigation. I don't think that I would have been a happy person being a trial lawyer, though, as a litigator. I'm just not wired that way. I have a sister who is and loves it. And so, you know, I just would, echoing what Julie said, there's so many paths that you can take with the law background, and there's so many ways in which you can find occasion to find your talents and find your loves, and that's what I think makes it a really exciting path. And I wouldn't have said that from 1985 to 1988, but in looking back on it, I feel like I'm really, really lucky that I went, actually. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, people who know me personally before they know me professionally always say, you're a litigator, you're too sweet to be a litigator. And I often send my husband to like fight with the car repair people, and I'm not a combative personality. I love being a litigator though, because I love to read, I love to write. My favorite time of day is like 2 o'clock when the phone stops ringing and I get to spend the rest of my afternoon just writing and briefing. And I think a lot of people say, you shouldn't go to law school unless you're really sure you want to be a lawyer, which I don't think is true. I think you shouldn't go to law school unless you're sure you're ready to be a student for 3 more years, because it is like going to high school again, as far as a class every day and having a locker and those sorts of things. But I do think that as more and more women are in the practice, the kind of idea of what is a litigator and what is a good litigator, I would like to think is changing. And I think as far as a person who is pragmatic, enjoys giving advice, enjoys talking, asking questions and listening to the answers, is sort of a different personality of litigator that I would like to think that as more women enter the practice, will feel comfortable that there are other personalities. And you know the argument style I love to take is kind of professorial almost, like you're teaching the judge what it is you have to say. The judge knows more than you know, or more than I know, obviously, but I like that approach as opposed to bang on the table and acting enraged. So,
Mr. Verrilli, do you want to comment?
This is a hard question for me to respond to effectively, because it's never occurred to me to do anything other than what I've done my whole professional life. I remember a day in my first year in law school in the fall. It was afternoon class, civil procedure, and I was sitting on the bench before class outside the classroom with 2 of my close friends, and we were talking about the subject that was going to be discussed in class that day. And I remember this feeling coming over me that where I just said to myself, boy, I understand how this all works. I just kind of got this feeling that this was something I knew. My brain plugged into the law effectively, so I'm not sure I can explain that in a rational way, but it did. And that I really liked it. And I've been a very fortunate person because that feeling has never left me since that time. So I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But I can't explain it to you in any rational way. It's just kind of the way it's unfolded.
Is that a hand I see? Yeah. Okay, can we get you a microphone?
Thanks,
Great,
ma'am.
thank you.
I guess my question is, if you think you do want to enter public service law or public interest law, do you think there are any benefits or drawbacks from going into private first, or is there some temporal advantage of doing something before another? Just out of curiosity.
I have a perspective on that, which is that actually, if you go into a private, what you will hear is from the private firms is that you get a lot of really good training at the firm, and so you should do that first, and then you can go do public service later. I don't agree with that. I think first, for reasons that that you've heard from the panel here, you actually get a lot better experience in a public sector position as a young lawyer than you do in a firm like Simpson Thacher or Jenner & Block, where I was, where you can often wait years and years before you have a chance as a young lawyer to do some significant things. So I don't think you get the benefit of training. But what you do get is addicted to a very high income level, which means that any job that you're going to take in the public sector is going to require you to make a judgment to make considerably less money than you'd be making if you were at a big firm. Now, people do it, but I do think it's actually hard to do. I think it's hard to do, and a lot of people have trouble with it. And so I don't think you really get a training benefit, and I think you may actually make it harder for you to do what you really want to do by going into a firm first. Now, having said that, it's actually harder to get a public service job as a young lawyer than you might think.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of folks who have decided that they need another path in the law besides the big firm life. And so getting a job as an assistant United States attorney, or getting a job in a state AG's office, or getting a job at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or any one of a number of other public interest organizations can be very competitive and difficult. And so maybe you'll end up at a firm for a while, but I do think that there isn't a logic, to my mind, that suggests that you should start at a firm. If anything, the logic is you start in the public sector.
On that point, I'd like to make a comment which perhaps exceeds my authority as moderator, but I feel that I wanted to let the students in the audience know, which is that
Separation of powers.
There have been some really, in my opinion, good changes to law student loan and law student loan forgiveness in recent years under the current administration. And so, for instance, I graduated from law school, and I also got a master's at the same time, with over $200,000 in debt if you add up law, master's, and Dartmouth. So I won't comment on what my personal career desires might have been at the time, but from a financial standpoint, there are only a certain number of jobs one can take and make a loan payment on a house, basically. That was the piece of paper on my wall. And only a portion of that money was forgivable at the time, because only a portion of it was government loans. Now, my husband's in law school, and he faces a very different set of choices, because all of the graduate school loans that he has for his law degree, same amount, actually probably more, because the tuition keeps going up, not down, are backed by the federal government. And so if he were to take a job in a state attorney's office, in a U.S. attorney's office, for a registered 501c3 organization, he could go into income-based repayment. And so his monthly loan payment would be capped at a maximum of 15% of his income over the poverty level. There's a certain little formula and what have you. But I mention this because people think that it would be impossible for them to go take a job making $30,000 a year out of law school, even if they really want to do public service, because of the financial obstacles. And those obstacles aren't necessarily present today if you can fall into one of these either some law schools actually have their own programs on loan forgiveness, but there's also a federal program on loan forgiveness. So I wanted to make sure I made that point at some point. Now, I believe we have a question or comment over here.
Just a quick comment, there's a story that says that if there's one lawyer in town, they have no work. As soon as there are two lawyers in town, there's a lot of work. So I just thought I'd offer a contrary view to the Solicitor General on the point that he just made. My own career path spent 4 years in a large law firm. And then went into the government. My view is, and was in the federal government for 10 years before moving back and now practicing again with a fairly large law firm. I do believe that law firms do a lot of good training of young associates to teach them how to be a good lawyer. They don't necessarily get the great experience, and I used to say that when I moved to the government, after being an associate for 4 years, that I all of a sudden became the senior partner, the junior partner, the senior associate, the junior associate, the paralegal, and the copy repair person, so that in the government you get tremendous experience. But I will also say that one of the things that I got to benefit from, and these are things that take place at times, but not necessarily always, the government had a competitive pay program. So when I moved into the government 4 years out of school, I was making 25% more than my colleagues who had gone into the government straight from law school and continued, just because of certain intricacies in the federal pay system. And I spent 10 years in the federal government, so I highly recommend it to everyone as a great career. But I just did want to make sure, just as there are lots of paths of what kinds of things you will do as a lawyer, there are lots of paths on how to get there.
Can I just chime in for a moment?
Sure.
And I just want to say, if you think you want to be a trial attorney and you sort of decide that in law school, it looks exciting on TV. It's far less glamorous in real life. But one thing you should strongly consider is becoming a state prosecutor at the county level or a public defender. Because in this day and age, not that many cases try in the civil litigation area, even the insurance defense cases. And if you want to do that, and it's very, very exciting, and it's, it takes a lot out of you, that is just about the only way you're going to learn how to try cases, is those two areas. There are a few places here and there where you may get to try cases on a regular basis. But as a young lawyer, you can learn how to try a case, and you can take those skills and into private practice, into the U.S. Attorney's Office, wherever it may be, and you'll have those, and because of that, you will be a rare commodity, because so few litigators know how to try cases. And when you know how to try a case, whether you're a criminal defense attorney, a civil litigator, a prosecutor, you have a huge advantage over the other guy, because most of the other guys don't know how to try a case, and they don't want to try a case. And if you want to try a case and know how to do it, your client or the government you work for is in much better shape.
Excellent point.
I taught history here at Dartmouth for about 40 years. I figure I wrote somewhere between 250 and 350 letters of recommendation for law school. Part of it was my grades correlated almost absolutely with the LSATs. So I could be a reasonably good predictor of where they were going to get into law school. But my question has to do with, you've concentrated here on the public and the private. And the private has been largely large law firms. The lawyers, the students that I remember best that went on to law school, one works in the baseball commissioner's office, one's a lawyer for a college. There's a whole range of things that don't fit into the two broad categories. And my question is just simply, am I talking about 5% of the people who come through law school, or 30% or 15%? I mean,
Who would like to field that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually did one thing you're talking about is kind of the in-house path, it sounds like, which I did a brief stint in. I had a secondment for Beiersdorf last year. They make Nivea and Aquaphor and Eucerin. Many people you talk to in a law firm are really looking to go into those jobs. There aren't as many of them. It's harder to get them. And then academics as well. I live in Albany, so I sometimes lecture at Albany Law School, a couple lectures a year. And I think you had asked about kind of what people are interested in. Those are two things I'm certainly interested in. I was in a panel last week when I was sitting in the audience listening to in-house people trying to take notes on how to get their job. I'm also listening on how to get your jobs and your job too. So I think
we're all taking notes here.
I really brought my business card. And I think what the law is a great thing to do if you have a short attention span and like to learn about lots of different industries. And I'm starting to realize I'm far enough in my career that I don't know what I don't know. And I ask everybody, how'd you get there? There's never any logical path, it seems like. And you can do things to position yourself. Like if you want to go to public sector, you need to have some volunteer work to show why you've been hiding in a law firm for 7 years, to sound sincere. But I think those types of jobs you just mentioned are ones that people are very interested in. I think, and I think they are harder to come by.
And yeah, and Professor, it's been a couple of years since I've been in law school, but I don't think it's changed much. That there's very little effort made in most law schools to expose students to the types of careers and opportunities that you're referring to. It is, there's been increased effort probably in the last 10 or 12 years on the public sector, more programs, clinics, more classes, but it is really more generally geared towards what is considered the traditional practice of law, and that is going to law firms to be corporate titans, to be litigators, to be tax attorneys, to be bankruptcy attorneys. And it's not until attorneys are out in the real world trying to practice that they realize, wow, I had other options. You know, I didn't know this existed. And I think to the point that Leah was just making, there was a time when many, if not most, in-house positions were considered the places where attorneys went just before they retired. But now in-house positions are very robust and very difficult to get because, one, companies have streamlined how much money they want to spend on outside counsel. And so now they are hiring younger and what they feel better prepared attorneys to do the work in-house, and they stay because these positions tend to be nice. If you're with a good company that has interesting work that's going to pay you well, you tend to stay. And so they don't turn over as frequently as some other positions.
Please use the microphone.
Just to add to that, I mean, as you all know, probably the legal profession is undergoing seismic changes right now, and we in legal education are everybody is talking about what should the law school experience look like given the changes that are forthcoming, and that's seem to be, there's a sense that these aren't just this just isn't a single recession that's going to end and we'll go back to how things were in the past. I think there's a lot of thought that things are going to be just structurally very different. One of the things we're doing is we're teaching entrepreneurship courses. I can never pronounce that word well.
I'm going to interrupt to say the we would be UNH.
Oh, I'm sorry.
School of
I'm
Law.
at University of New Hampshire School of Law down in Concord. There's been a huge focus, though, on experiential learning. We're really focusing on our externship programs. We're really focusing on our clinical programs where you can actually function as a practicing lawyer and represent clients in law school. And we're trying to teach people about how to manage a law office, how to start a law office. We encourage people to go get experience first, but everything's changing, and legal work now can be done from anywhere. It doesn't need to be done, from a high rise in a big city at all. And so, your generation is going to not be a generation, I don't think, where many people are going to go and hook up with one or two or three organizations and spend your life with them. You're going to be moving from situation to situation to situation, and you're going to be, an active architect, I think, of your career. Sure.
Well, we have time for one more question, if there is one. Okay, well, I have to thank you all for coming today, and again, for coming to our Law Day events. We look forward to seeing you in 2013. And for the students in the audience, I want to let you know that the Dartmouth Lawyers Association, we have so many members who are willing to mentor, to give advice on law school. I know that the Office of Career Services once a year does do a session on how to apply to law school. I gave it last year. I know that they either have already given it or about to give it this year. And so if you're considering applying to law school, I would certainly recommend looking into those resources that are on campus. But your alum network here at Dartmouth, as I think you all know by now, is really, really strong. And so I recommend you take advantage of it. And something that Leah said about finding out how people got to where they were or find out their path, that is a great way to think about some of these things. If you meet somebody and you're like, wow, that job sounds really cool, wonder how they did that. Ask them and find out what their path was, and maybe that might help you find yours. So with that, thank you, and have a great afternoon.